Hey there, it's Seb Frey here with another exciting episode of Seb Frey TV, and today I'm going to go a little off topic and I'm going to touch the third rail of American discourse. I'm going to talk about white privilege, yay! And you're saying, hey, what's this, a white male talking about white privilege? Like, what can he know about it? Well, I got a few things. So let me just start out by saying, the other day I watched The Green Book. Have you seen that movie, The Green Book? It got Best Picture at the Oscars and Best Actor and all this. And there's a lot of controversy around the movie because people are saying, oh, it's the trope of the white savior, or like we've seen this with Driving Miss Daisy, or like whatever. It wasn't that good of a movie. I don't really know what the story is about, why people don't like it so much, and I don't know. I thought it was a good movie. Go and see it, I think. But the thing is that it was set like in the 1960s, right? Which is, within the lifetime of many people who could be watching this episode of Seb Frey TV. And like The Green Book, it was a real thing, right? It was a book for Negro motorists, I guess, and would tell them like where along the route it was okay, where they could stay, and they wouldn't be hassled. They'd be welcome to stay in hotels and restaurants and gas stations where they could use the bathroom and that kind of stuff. So it's a movie about these two guys, a white guy and a black guy, who were driving through the Midwest and I guess the South, and I really enjoyed the movie. But the point is that did happen, right? Like those kind of events depicted in the movie, not those actual events necessarily per se, but like things like that happened all the time. It was just a part of the fabric of American life. And this was in the 1960s, right, which is a time when many people who are still alive today lived through all that, right? And one could say very clearly, if you watch that movie, that the white people enjoyed a level of privilege which non-white people did not, okay? So, now, point number two. The other day I got an email from the Government Affairs Director for the Santa Cruz County Association of Realtors, and he forwarded an article that appeared in a local newspaper, I think it was the Contra Costa Times or something like that, where it was saying how upset people were to like be reading on their preliminary title report the CC&Rs, the conditions, covenants, and restrictions for the property which they were buying or interested in buying, and it had words like saying like no person who is not of the Caucasian or white race may own or live in any properties in this area, right? So wow, right? So that was actually written into many deeds. And there's a thing in the preliminary title report which says, like, any provision which says that you can't live here or whatever based on race, creed, religion, ethnicity, whatever, is non-enforceable and all that, right? So that is the law today, but that is still written into many CC&Rs that you're going to find in California properties, right, all over the place. And it wasn't until 1968 that the Fair Housing Act came along. It's a federal law. Fair Housing Act came along and banned all that. It outlawed all that, said you can't do that, right? So boom, 1968, that becomes the law of the land. It's not okay to have that written to any CC&Rs, and that's non-enforceable, right? Okay, well, 1968. I was born in 1971, so 3 years before I came to grace the earth with my presence, this kind of stuff was going on. Now, let's just say 1968 Fair Housing Act, stroke of a pen. All of a sudden, does that mean it's an end to white privilege? Or do the attitudes which went into the creation of those restrictions on property deeds and whatnot, do those attitudes, were they still prevalent a second after that was signed, or 2 seconds after, or a day or a year, or 4 decades later, right? So let me just tell you a couple of stories from my real life, right? So back when I was a kid in my 20s, I had the good fortune to live in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I lived there for a year. I was working for an Australian company, and there were a bunch of Australians there, and there were some local people there too, obviously, and so I lived there for a year. It was great, had a lot of fun, and if anybody from Malaysia is watching this, hello, I love you, and I think about my time in Malaysia fondly all the time. Can't wait to get back again and bring my kids over there and have some mee goreng and all that good stuff. So anyway, when I was there, a lot of people I knew, they were expats or they were, wealthier Malaysians, right, professional type people, and they would live in like secured buildings or compounds or whatever, and there was a gate at the entrance to these buildings or compounds, and there'd be people there manning the gate, and they would be checking, to see who was going in or out of the building, except when I would come, right, or any white person would come. If I was coming, I would just walk through the gate like it didn't even exist, and nobody would challenge me, nobody would say anything to me, because I was white, right? So like Malaysia used to be a colony of Great Britain, and that stopped, I think, in the late 1950s. But there's still, I guess, there's a lot of attitude in Malaysia, like hey, you're a white guy, you must be okay, and that is white privilege right there, if you ask me, because I had the privilege of not being stopped and explaining to anybody why I was going into that compound or building. Now you're gonna say, hey Seb, that was 25 years ago or whatever, and that's Malaysia, not this country. Well, here is something that happened to me just the other day. This happened to me in late January. I was down in Palm Springs. I was actually at Indian Wells. I was there for the California Association of Realtors business conference, and it so happened that these guys I know on Facebook, they were having a marketing meeting across the street. And when I say across the street, I really mean like a mile away across a golf course, but yeah, it's pretty close by, right? So I jumped in an Uber and went over there. And so my Uber driver, he was a guy who, he talked with a bit of an accent. I'm not really sure where he's from. And he wasn't like a pale, like Viking type. He had like a bit of a tan complexion. I can't really say, I have no idea where the guy was from or what his accent was about. Was it Portuguese? Was it Lebanese? I really have no idea. Anyway, point is, I was wearing a suit because I was at the California Association of Realtors business conference, and my hair was coiffed and I had a shirt on, right? But didn't have a tie, no tie, but middle-aged white guy sitting in the back of like a mid-size, I think it was American, standard, it was like a Chevy Malibu or something like that. So we pull up to the gate of the Indian Wells Golf and Country Club, and there's a couple of guys there, and then without even saying anything, without asking to roll down the window, they look down into the car and they see me sitting there in the back in my my suit and my shirt and my coiffed hair and my lovely not too dark complexion, and they just go, come on right in. They didn't say a word. They just looked at me and they waved me through, right? And I said to the Uber guy, I said, well, I guess I look like the kind of guy they want to have in here. And then he laughed and he said, right, you look exactly like the kind of guy they want to have in here. Because what do you want to bet? That if I didn't look exactly as I did, that maybe if I were poorer looking or darker looking, that they might have rolled down the window and said, hey, what are you doing here? But they didn't. They just waved me through. And that right there, if you ask me, is an example of white privilege, and that is going on here and now today. Now, what are we going to do about it, right? I don't know what we're going to do about it. What we're doing about it as a society is we were, until lately anyway, trying to expand the franchise of liberty, right? We're trying to make sure that all of the freedoms that we are guaranteed through our Constitution and laws are applied equally to all members of society, right? And that is ongoing work. We're still working on that. And it's like a pendulum, right? It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I think we're taking 1 step back, but you know what? I don't want to take 2 steps back, right? I can't wait till the pendulum swings the other way and we keep on marching forward, because I don't really feel that it would be a lot of skin off my nose if I were to have to roll down the window and explain to the guy at the Indian Wells Golf Resort and Country Club what I was doing there. Wouldn't put me out too much, I don't think. So anyway, I just want to get that on my chest, right? That I think white privilege is alive and well, and hopefully, though, we will be seeing a diminution of that going forward, because I really want to live in a society where everybody has as equal privileges under the law and culturally as well. And I really hope we can get there. And if people continue to work and vote their conscience, it's going to happen. All right, that is it for this episode of Seb Frey TV. I hope you enjoyed listening to a white male talk about white privilege. Do me a favor, if you think anybody else cares what I think about white privilege, go ahead and share this with your friends, families, coworkers, or whoever. All right, that is it for this episode of Seb Frey TV. Thank you so much for watching. I will have another episode up for you before too long.